A new report titled Flush with Cash, Wisconsin's Growing Financial Reserves, released by Forward Analytics. Boy, I'm sorry. I wrote all this stuff down wrong this morning, so we're just going to totally wing this here. You have a new report out this morning. It shows that the state of Wisconsin's financial reserves totaled $4.3 billion at the end of fiscal 2021, and it's growing. Yet, our rainy day fund is likely insufficient to weather the next recession. Joining us this morning to discuss this is Forward Analytics Director and author of the report, Dale Knapp. Dale, good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I got this report, I think, a couple of days ago, and the headline was, and we just put it up on drydenmore.com this morning, new study finds Wisconsin state reserves at an all-time high. So I'm like, hey, that's great. And then I see the sub-headline, yet rainy day fund likely insufficient to weather the next recession. I'm like, oh, man. So I like the contrast there. So there's a lot to get into. I have the report here, or not the whole report, but the news release we put out. The report is also on our website. Lot to get to and unpack for you to kind of walk us through what this means. Again, it looks like it's a good thing, but also we should be careful. But before that, Forward Analytics. What is Forward Analytics, and how did you become a part of that?
Sure. Forward Analytics is actually the research arm of the Wisconsin Counties Association. So the Wisconsin Counties Association is the organization that all of our counties belong to, and we represent them, in Madison in terms of helping legislators, understand county needs, what they do, et cetera, making sure that county government runs as smoothly as possible. Forward Analytics is relatively new. We began in 2019 as the research arm. And so I came over a little bit before that in 2018, after 18 years with the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. So the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance was a nonpartisan public policy research organization. So I spent 18 years there as the research director, doing this kind of same thing, looking at major issues facing the state, be they financial in terms of, the state finances, which this deals with, demographics, the demographic challenges Wisconsin faces. We've done things on rural Wisconsin. My background is in economics. So we do some economic stuff. So coming from the Taxpayers Alliance, we started Forward Analytics as the Taxpayers Alliance actually folded in 2018. And so
okay. So there was a hole there.
Yes. And so I'm continuing kind of what they were doing, prior to when they merged with the Wisconsin Policy Board.
Sure. So you said you have background in economics.
Yeah.
What is that? I mean, when you were a kid, I don't know, you just said, have you always loved this stuff, or your parents forced you into it? Why'd you go into this career?
Well, so actually my background is, my undergraduate is in political science.
Nice.
I've always had an interest in politics. And at the time I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And that was a decent way to kind of, get into law school. When I graduated, I was a little bit hesitant. And so I went out and got a job and started working. And I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer.
What was that? Why? I mean, what was the thing that, I just don't want to do this. What was that?
Well, actually learning more about what most lawyers do. I didn't want to be a corporate lawyer. There was just a lot of reasons. It was just, it just sort of didn't really interest me. And so I spent, 10 years, actually in sales, working, learning about the world, really, how it really works. And at that point, my interest sort of moved toward finance and economics. And so that's when I went back to get a master's and a PhD in economics. because that's where my interest was. And so I have this political background and I have this economics background, which actually I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it ended up working. It fit perfect with Wisconsin Taxpayers
Yeah,
Alliance with what they were doing. So it all ended up working out better than I had expected, really.
sure. Now, is Forward Analytics also a nonpartisan? Right? This, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that was one of the things when I was talking about coming over here and starting this. Um, that was one of the things that was it had to be that way because there's plenty of organizations out there on both the left and the right that will do research and it gets spun in a different way. And one of the real values that I saw, and actually, a lot of people that received our stuff, they wanted stuff that was nonpartisan, that was really got to the heart of the issue, and maybe, explained, okay, now this can be interpreted this way, how maybe the right would interpret it. This could be interpreted this way, how the left would interpret it. But here's, the straight facts, and, you make your own judgment on how you want to think about it.
Sure. Uh, yeah, so it's like what was I think it was a name of an episode of West Wing, which is like my favorite series ever, and I think it was there's lies, damn lies, and
Yep.
statistics. So
Yeah.
you can kind of make
Yeah.
make anything to kind of prove your point if you
Sure.
just kind of craft it in a certain way. So this is information that is this is just fact based. Here's the info. Come to your own conclusion. But we want you to know this information, why. And before we get to that, what is this information? Obviously, we just put this post up right before we went live. So obviously, most people haven't had a chance to read it yet, especially if they're watching this right now. So tell us about this report.
Yeah. Well, let me just go back to just what we were talking about in a second,
Sure.
because I think this is important.
Hmm?
I want people to understand that everybody has biases one way or another.
Sure.
I have political leanings. I have biases on certain things, that how I view the world. One of the things that working for the Taxpayers Alliance really allowed me to hone was taking those and setting those aside as best I can, in terms of this research. So, people, they're going to say, yeah, you're biased one way or another. Well, I have my worldview. I can't change that. Well, I
Sure.
can change it, but whatever.
Yeah, but I'm not
But
going
again,
to.
one of the things that we make sure we do is really, as best we can, put those aside in the research that we do and let the research tell the story.
Sure.
So, yeah, yeah.
And that
This
leads to the what is the research? Just again, reading through some of this here, at 22% of annual state spending reserves are at an all-time high. So let's just actually start right there. What do you
so
attribute this to?
it's attributed to really two factors, and the first one is the one that people. Well, let me go to the one that I think people kind of know. It's to some degree. Over the past 8 to 10 years, particularly over the past 3 years, 3 or 4 years, tax collections in the state have come in far above what was expected. So when the state budget is put together every 2 years, the state fiscal bureau, nonpartisan
Hmm.
fiscal bureau, it's the agency that looks nonpartisan at all the fiscal issues of the state. Um, they get together and with the Department of Revenue, and they put out revenue forecasts on which the state budget is built. Okay, and historically, their estimates are pretty good, barring recession. They're within 1%, 2% of it. And
That's pretty good.
predicting over 2 years, that's pretty difficult
Yeah,
to do.
right.
Um, over the past 8 to 10 years, and particularly the last few years, tax revenues have come in well above those projections. And so that's part of what's going on here.
Do they just have? Do we need new people who are forecasting? It's like some weathermen, they just don't get it right. It's like somebody just screwed
No,
up.
no.
I mean, why are we way above what
Well,
we thought?
so and there's a couple of reasons for that too. I think we don't know completely what's going on yet, and we'll figure that out. But
Sure.
um, when you look at the tax revenues, so essentially for state government, we're talking about, there's a lot of taxes, but the main ones are the individual income tax, the sales tax, and the corporate income tax. Those are 85 to 90% of the state tax revenues in the general fund that the state uses. Um, the biggest outlier here in terms of miss on expectations has been the corporate income tax. And so, one, it's a little bit difficult to predict corporate profits. They fluctuate
Sure.
a lot. And so that's part of it. But I think the other part of this is uh, several budgets ago, in the state budget, they authorized more auditors for the corporate revenue tax. In other words, really looking at corporate tax filings, and making
Oh,
sure that
it's on the
you
up
know
and up.
yeah, on the up and up.
Mm.
Um, and I think that has played a role. So, of the excess tax revenues, the vast majority has come through the corporate
Corp.
income tax. And so I think maybe, part of it is they may have underestimated sort of how much additional revenue they would be getting, due to this.
Sure.
But then there's, the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, for example, counties have a 0.5% local sales tax. Most counties do. When that hit, the big concern for counties was, what's going to happen with my sales taxes? With the economy kind of shut down, et cetera. And at the time we were trying to forecast, okay, what is this going to mean? Try to get a sense of, what are we looking at in terms of loss? And what actually happened was, people, completely shifted to online as much as possible, even more than they had before.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that happened during those the lockdowns was people were doing a lot of home renovation stuff, doing stuff to their homes. The sales in places like Menards and Lowe's, et cetera, just exploded. Just exploded.
Mm.
And actually in 2020, sales taxes set records. While we were thinking that they were going to be down,
Yeah.
people were spending, and part of that too was the influx of federal money, the stimulus checks, et cetera. When you multiply each one over, the entire state population, there was a lot of money flowing in the state. So again, it was very difficult to project. So
Sure.
that's part of it as well.
4.3 billion. Wisconsin's financial reserves. So just to be clear, what are reserves? Just money we just got sitting around doing nothing?
Yeah. So reserves are kind of there's two components to them. One is what's called the general fund balance. So the general fund is the state's main fund for spending our tax dollars. And think of it as a checking account. So you think of it as a checking account, you have a balance in the checking account.
Mm-hmm.
You make expenditures from that. Your paycheck gets deposited into it. So it's very similar to that. Well,
So
at the end of,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
Sorry.
Go ahead. At the end of each month, there's a balance in that.
Okay, so at 4.3 billion, we'll just say $4,300
Yeah.
in my checking account. And it looks like
So in this case, that balance in this case is 2.6 billion. So 2,600.
Yep. So that
that's part of it.
The
Okay.
reserves 4.3, then the
So
2.6 is the general fund.
So if we think about, is the general fund balance. So think of that as
Okay.
your checking account. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So you have $2,600 in your checking account at the end of the month
Yeah.
or at the end of the year or
Hmm.
whatever time period you're looking at. That's essentially what that is. Okay. For the state, it's,
Okay.
after they look at all of their spending and all of the money coming in, what's left over that's sitting there in the checking account.
2.6. And just to be clear, part of that, or why we have 2.6 billion in the general fund, a lot of that is the corporate tax stuff, right? Am I understanding
Yeah.
that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Corporate. It's a combination of corporate sales and income, but mostly extra corporate income tax.
Got it. And then it says there's 1.7 billion in rainy day fund.
Yeah. So think of the rainy day fund. You can think of it as a savings account or
Sure.
money that's, you don't spend it every day. It's sitting there
Got it.
for big purchases, for emergencies, etc.
Okay. That's and what is the normal for rainy day fund or in the last few years? I mean, 1.7 billion sounds like a lot of money.
Let me put this in perspective. If you go back to, let's say, 2000 to about 2013, the normal was essentially zero in the rainy day fund. We had nothing.
That soon ago?
We established a rainy day fund in 1986.
Okay.
The state did.
Okay.
Which was a good thing. It's a rainy day fund is there for emergencies.
Yeah, my car breaks down.
Yep.
That's what I use some of that money for. Got it.
So a good thing in the 1986 they established a rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
Great job. They didn't fund it. They put $0.
Well, we started it. I mean, hey,
we opened a savings account, but we didn't put any money in.
I love it.
Okay, and we didn't put really any money into it until 2007. So think about that. 20. It took us 20 years to make a deposit really into the rainy day fund. Nice. Now there were very small deposits. So there were people that would send in checks and say, "Please put this in the rainy day fund." So there was a tiny bit of money in there, but essentially it was
Sure.
the account was empty.
Okay.
Now why did we put, and this goes back to your first question. Why did we put a deposit in there in 2007? And this is the other reason, and it's the reason that nobody really knows about. Why we have these kinds of reserves right now. In the 2001 budget, again, this was fine. This was something that was done. It was really good for the state in the long term. They changed the law and said, okay, we don't have any money in the rainy day fund. How are we going to fund it? In a sense, they said, we don't have the willpower to fund it by ourselves.
Sure. Right.
We're not good at saving. So
well, at least they're honest.
So what they said was, okay, if tax revenues come in above what's projected, you have to put half of that into the rainy day fund.
Nice.
So that finally kicked in 2007.
Okay.
We put a relatively small amount into the rainy day fund. The first time we funded it, unfortunately, the 2008 recession happened the next year, and we spent it because
it was a rainy day at that point.
So for the most part, from 2000 to about 2012, 13, we really had nothing in the rainy day fund. But now think about this. We just talked about all of these excess tax revenues over the past 8 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. Half of that was required to go into the rainy day fund. So that's really the reason that we have that 1.7 billion in there. It's not the legislature finally said, oh, we need to put some money in there. They had to under state law.
Got it. I don't know if this is the right time to, hopefully this fits in. I got a graph.
Yes.
That was from your study, so I just took a screenshot of it. What are we looking at here?
So this is the combination of both the general fund balance that we talked about, the amount in the checking account, and the rainy day fund, which in officially it's called the budget stabilization fund. That's the orange part of the graph.
Okay, doke. That makes more sense because I didn't understand the budget stabilization fund. So I'm looking like, but what's the orange? I don't get it.
Yeah. So if you notice, this goes back to 1993. Um, you know, we had, especially in the 1990s, we had decent amounts of um, money in our checking account. A general fund balance actually was
Mm-hmm.
growing. The 1990s was a boom for Wisconsin's economy, and during that time, actually, revenues exceeded what was expected almost every year.
Sure.
And so that balance was growing. Now, if you put that screen up
Sure.
again,
Sure.
I want to show you something that's really. So notice what happened between 2000 and 2001. So we had, about $800 million in our checking account in 2000. By 2001, we had very little.
Mm-hmm.
And this tends to be kind of a historic phenomenon that when we get money into our um, checking account balance, we tend to spend it.
What?
And
No.
so
No.
what happened then was we said, oh, we've got $800 million. Um, let's do a tax cut. And the way they did the tax cut was, if some of us older people remember, it was called a sales tax rebate. So they essentially took that money and gave it back to taxpayers. Now, again, that's not a bad thing. We have excess money. Um, you know, what are you going to do with it? One of the reasonable things to do would be to give it back.
Sure.
Um, but at the same time, if you notice, there was no, in those early years, there's no orange.
None. Not until
There's no orange.
2004,
Yeah.
and it's a
So
tiny.
we didn't, essentially, um, we had, other than that balance there, we had no additional money. And what happened was recession hits in 2001, and notice by 2003 that general fund balance is negative. In other words, we were overdrawn.
Mm.
Um, and during that time, we saw a lot of budget cuts, some tax increases to try to deal with the fact that tax revenues were uh, low because of recession, and we didn't have any savings.
Mm. So then it starts there, like you were just talking about,
Yep. Yep.
2013, 7%. So it starts going up,
Yep. So
and then
finally, so finally, it starts going up, and what you see is, again, the especially that orange keeps growing and growing a little bit, little by little, until 19, 20, 21 really explodes.
yeah,
Again, that's because revenues came in um, more than expected. But again, I'll show you something else. And again, this is really important. Go back to that graph one
sure,
more
sure, sure,
time.
sure.
Notice in um, 2013 that general fund balance, the green, is back up to about $800 million.
Mm-hmm.
And what did we do? We spent it down over the next 2 years. Again, this is just a history of what we've done in state budgets. In 10 of the past 14 budgets, um, as they were enacted, we've the legislature and the governor have spent down the general fund balance. We just we have this tendency to want to spend whatever money is in there. We were bailed out. The reason that TO line is going up, we were bailed out because again collections came in much higher than projected.
Sure.
But in terms of their budgeting, they wanted to spend down that balance every year.
So part of this report that you have authored, let me just read through some of this here. Oh yeah, 10 out of 14 budgets drew down this balance to pay for ongoing spending. There's that part. However, most budget experts argue that a 5% target is too low. So what is this target that we're talking about?
So when they required that half of excess revenues go to the rainy day fund, the other thing they said was, well, once that rainy day fund gets to 5% of spending, we don't have to do that anymore. Okay. So from now on, because we're at over 8% of spending, that that law will not be triggered anymore. So there will no longer be deposits to
Okay.
that rainy day fund.
I see it there. State law restricts use of these funds to times when revenues lag budgeted amounts. Currently, the 1.7 billion in that fund is 8.4% of spending.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
above the 5% target
But
in.
it's above yeah. And so when that was put into law, the thinking was, for the most part, by financial experts that 5% is a decent cushion. You should probably have more, but we're looking at a lot of states had 5% as sort of their target. Um, you, you know if you think about that as an emergency fund, there's no need. There's often no need to just let it grow and grow and grow and grow. Because you could invest. There's other
Oh,
things you
sure,
may want
sure,
to do with it.
sure.
So you set a target. You say, okay, we want to set aside $5,000, $7,000, whatever that number is. And so the state said, well, when we get to 5%, we think we're going to be okay.
Sure.
But if you look at what happened in the 2008-9 recession, just in the first year, tax revenues came in 11% below what was expected. So that 5% number wouldn't have covered it. And in fact, that went on if you look at what was really needed, it was in the 15 to 20% range. And so these financial experts have said, okay, we need to rethink this. And to be probably a better target for a rainy day fund is somewhere in the lines of 15 to 16%. And
Okay.
that's really what most states, or a significant number of states, have as their targets now.
Got it. So now that subheadline, yet rainy day fund likely insufficient to weather next recession. Now that makes sense. And reading right here, these were actually, I mean, your part of your report here. Most budget experts argue 5% is too low, with many recommending holding at least 15% of spending in reserve. If Wisconsin were to augment the budget stabilization fund to this level using a portion of the general fund balance, it would ensure the state is well prepared for the next recession while leaving 1.3 to 2.6 billion to use for other priorities. So this is just would you consider this it's a study, it's a report, but is it also a recommendation, or is that, we don't want to say that word?
We don't want to say that word,
okay.
but so one of the things that really triggered this report, there's sort of two things. One is a lot of the legislature, if you look at when they sort of came in, they really don't know the early 2000s history of some degree of state finance.
Sure.
And then now what you're looking at huge turnover. So part of this was, help these legislators really understand our fiscal history and where we are. And we now have this record opportunity. But what you've been seeing is, again, with this balance, what the talk is, how do we spend it? How do we spend it? And so this report is simply putting out there, there's probably needs in a lot of areas where we could spend this money, or tax cuts, which everybody would love. But there's another way that we could use part of it that would probably that our financial advisor would say, yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Sure.
The amount that you have put aside in case of an emergency is a little bit low. Maybe take a portion of that and let's boost that up, so that, if you get laid off, if something, big emergency hits, you'll have that cushion to draw on, and you're not going to have to go to your credit card. That's essentially what this report is saying.
So speaking of turnover there, that's Romaine Quinn, former representative and now running for the 25th Senate. I wish we could plug in state debt levels onto that chart to see how that compares with these other data points. Oh, that really wasn't a question. Sorry, that was a question. Romaine, come on. So you take this report and you give this to, or you present this to, you send a memo right to everyone, and it's, again, not a recommendation, but like you were saying, that it's here's all the numbers, here's the information, do with it what you want.
Yeah.
So with that being said, and this is, Forward Analytics in this report, this is not a partisan thing. But come on, everything's partisan. Not you guys. I'm saying how, when you look at this, is it helping you or hurting you in order for anyone to take this seriously if it isn't a partisan or if it isn't promoting one more party than the other because they have to own it, right? It has to be our thing. So is it helpful or hurtful that it's nonpartisan study?
Well, I think it goes both ways. It's helpful, in terms of when legislators, when people look at it and say it's nonpartisan, they can say, "Okay, I get it. You're laying it out, but here's how I might think about that." So somebody that's leaning right might say, "Okay, I get it, but I'd rather do this with the money." Or somebody on the left might say, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I get that, but we have these priorities." So, but where it hurts, kind of being nonpartisan, is sometimes getting the word out, because there's a lot of research that's done from right wing organizations. There's a lot of research done from left wing organizations, and oftentimes, that research is spun, to whatever the philosophy is. We're saying, and so sometimes it's hard to get the research out. We've been pretty good with that, but I think it's beneficial to the state, to legislators, to have something that says, okay, I mean, it's similar. It's similar to this coming from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, nonpartisan, saying, here's the numbers. There's a lot of things that you can do with this, but from a perspective of the state being ready for the next recession, you might want to consider this, so that when that hits, we don't have to raise taxes to fill budget holes. We don't have to cut spending on services that are very important for the state. So,
so with the elections coming up, how do I? Again, I don't want this to be political per se, but with the elections coming up, Ben Dryden, my neighbor, or who's ever listening, Renee, Karen, and Sharon, why should we care? I mean, this is, you've walked us through this, and obviously people want more information. It's on our website at driving.com. We put it up this morning. This is a lot of this information, of course, is going to get to the legislators so they can kind of get educated. Like you said, there's turnover, especially this year. There's going to be quite a bit. It just seems like everybody's resigning or not seeking office. So there'll be quite a bit, right? There'll be a lot of freshmen legislators this coming cycle. So they'll all have access to this. They'll all see this. But for the average person, what do we care?
Well, there's a lot of reasons you care. So suppose that you have kids in school. Your number one priority is making sure education is funded. Go back and look what happened after the 2008-9 recession, when we had no savings. State funding for schools was cut. There was a lot of impact on schools. If we're not prepared for the next recession, schools are the biggest chunk of state general fund spending. So that's where they're going to look first to cut. If your priority is, I know I have to pay taxes, but I want my taxes to be relatively low. Again, go back and look what happened in the 2008-9 recession, when, again, to balance the budget, we had to raise taxes. So, really, no matter what your issue is, you may say, okay, this doesn't matter. But then think about, there's going to be another recession. We know that. We don't know when. There's going to be one. Do I want the state to be prepared, so that whatever my issue is in terms of what state government doesn't get cut? I think that's what makes this important for everybody to look at. And again, you may say, okay, we want to take, suppose again, go back to the education. You may say, well, rather than put it in the rainy day fund, I'd rather have them spend it on education today, and that's fine.
Sure.
But again, take a look at it and say, in the long term, um, should we make sure that we're prepared for that next recession? And the way to do that, again, is to make sure the rainy day fund is fully funded, or funded a little bit more than we are now. And
And
again,
I'm sorry.
and the other thing is, so we've been talking about that 4.3 billion. So the
Yep.
Legislative Fiscal Bureau, when they look at, every year, sort of what's happening with tax revenues and how the budget's playing out, they came out in January and said, tax revenues, at least given how things are going now already, are going to come in another $1.3 billion more than were expected.
Sure.
So if things go according to what they're looking at, and the economy is changing right now, we know that, we're talking about even more dollars in there. So even funding that rainy day fund to some bigger number, there's still going to be a big pot of money to do,
Sure.
to fund services, to
Other
cut,
things. And I think
do
this is what, so
whatever.
Dan Erickson had a question there, and I think that speaks right to it. Say the state does increase the rainy day fund. What would you do with the remainder? I think that just did. I mean, it's not necessarily
That's it.
you, right? It's
Yeah,
whatever you want to use it for, and that's up to the legislators. That's up
it is.
to people that vote them in and what the people want, et cetera, et cetera. But out of curiosity, so Renee has a good question here. Where's the second most spent funding used? So the first one was education. Do you happen to know that?
Yes, it's spent on um, and I'm
Roads?
drawing a
No,
blank.
not roads.
Um,
Well,
yeah, it'll come to me here in a second.
that's perfectly
Um,
fine. Uh, so this, boy, I just had a question there as well. Boy, we're both kind of forgetting where we are. So this all goes out to them. We understand why this report is out, but why did you do this? Was this a directive? Was it something where you just woke up one day and you kind of happened to look back and notice how this was going and said, man, someone needs to do a study, do a report on this? How did that come to be?
this came to be. So again, this was something when I was at the Taxpayers Alliance, something we talked about all the time. We need to fund the rainy day fund. We need to have some reserves, and it never happened. And now we're at this unprecedented level of reserve. So we had that. Well, then I was at an event and talking with a legislator. In fact, a legislator that has been around for quite a while, um, and that legislator um, did not understand sort of why, to some degree, to really why we had this. They knew that they didn't know that much about um, the law that was passed in 2001,
Sure.
any of it. So they didn't really have that sense of history, which I just think is really important if
Yeah.
you're, thinking about what are we going to do with this. So that was what really triggered it. Was if that person doesn't have a good sense, there's a lot of other legislators that
Sure.
don't have that
Yep.
perspective
Yep.
either. And now, with the turnover that we're going to have, we're going to have even more people. So I just think the timing was perfect, and that's what sort of sparked it. That
Sure.
conversation.
And I think maybe one of the ways it could kind of tie to just the average person as well, especially during an election cycle, which, by the way, it's really silly that they do the budget like as soon as people get in. I feel like that should be the opposite year, the year after. At least if they're just getting in, why are
Yeah.
we doing a budget when I don't even know where the bathrooms are? That's so silly to me, but whatever. That now when these things do come up, that's also important for maybe people to ask candidates that are running for things like Romaine Quinn, ask their opinions. hey, listen, I saw this report. What is your opinion about the rainy day fund? Should it stay at 5%? Should we not have it? Should it be at 10 or 15? Do you agree? Do you not agree? And if you don't want to use it, which that's fine, or don't want to increase it to 15, 16%, want to keep it to 5, what are you planning on that 10%? What were you planning on using that for? And it's okay. It's just that may be really good questions to ask everyone that people know that are running, because a lot of people are obviously running. I don't think there'll be an uncontested race this year anywhere in the state. I know going forward, no kidding, we have a lot of candidates on and politicians on. I want to ask them, and every single one from now until the election, and I'll keep a track of it on a spreadsheet, and I'm going to send you all their responses. Not that you necessarily care, but I'm going to keep track of it because I want to ask all them too.
Yeah, and I, again, this is not a partisan issue.
Nope.
I just think it's a what are your priorities for this money?
Yep.
And I think that's a legitimate question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're up against the time right now. Is there anything in this report or anything that we didn't get a chance to discuss that you wanted to make sure that we talked about?
No, I think we covered a lot here, and it's been really enjoyable.
Aw, you say that to all the hosts. Okay. Maybe, do you have anything else coming up? Because, boy, if you keep releasing these studies, we're going to keep having you on.
Well, yeah, we've got one in the hopper on migration patterns. One of our big issues has been our demographic challenges and the declining birth rates, et cetera. And the only way that in 10 years we're going to have any kind of workforce comparable today is if we get more people moving here. We'd have that problem. So we have a piece coming out on that. And then probably in the fall, there's going to be a piece on housing. There's some really interesting things going on in the housing market throughout the state. So we're going
to. Each time you release one, you are welcome back on the show. Well, you're welcome on the show anytime you want, but that would be awesome if you wanted to. Thank you so very much for coming on and kind of walking us through all this stuff. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you for doing this report.
Good. And if I would suggest go to forward-analytics.net and take a look at other stuff we've done. Again, the demographic problem, the rural problem. There's a lot of stuff that's
I actually just went there this morning, and I hadn't been there because I just got the report email, but I didn't actually go to the site. And I found it this morning. I'm like, holy cow, you got a whole bunch of stuff on there.
Yep, and more coming.
Awesome. All right, the report, Flush with Cash, Wisconsin's Growing Financial Reserves, is available to view on drydenwire.com right now. Special thank you to our guest today, Forward Analytics Director and author of the report, Dale Knapp. Reminder, tomorrow morning I'll be chatting with 7th Congressional District Representative Tom Tiffany, where I'll be bringing this up, by the way. And next week on Tuesday, Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald and I will be doing a special noontime show with some giveaways for our Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy, followed on Wednesday with Tim Fry from Ignite Dispensary. And 1 week from today, candidate for Wisconsin's 25th Senate District seat, Romaine Quinn, will be on for a chat. So until next time, for DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden saying thank you for watching and have a blessed day.